This is an experimental remake of my earlier documentary about what London was really like during World War II, this time using text prompt-driven AI video software. It demonstrates how far video creation using AI has progressed over the past year. Sit back and watch this amazing AI recreation with often stunning results, but also still with many text prompt interpretation mistakes. The music is also AI generated. The German invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939 was the reason for the British government to declare war on Germany. Soon after, it was decided to evacuate most children from London and other cities to rural areas. Sad scenes could be observed as parents said goodbye to their children on London stations. The children were well looked after in villages, at farms and rural mansions. After the war, many children stated that this period was one of the best of their lives. During the war, military parades in front of Buckingham Palace still continued. Barrage balloons are an interesting topic. They were deployed all over London to hinder German bombers flying low over London, making it more difficult to perform accurate bombings. These tethered balloons were often released from London's parks, involving women from the WAAF, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. A number of times Churchill held meetings with his military chiefs of staff in the garden behind 10 Downing Street. He was always seen smoking his big cigars. In view of the food shortages, the Dig for Victory campaign was set up by the British Ministry of Agriculture. Men and women across the country were encouraged to grow their own food in times of harsh rationing. Open spaces everywhere were transformed into allotments, from domestic gardens to public parks. Surprisingly, even the lawns outside the Tower of London were turned into vegetable patches. The actively promoted scheme was to ensure that people had enough to eat and to keep morale high. During the whole war period, the shops remained open, despite shortages and bombed-out display windows. After the bombings, some of the shops were more open than usual.
Shining bright tonight, you're a vision, such a darling sight. But you're not the one I know, no. In this jazzy, lively flow, stepping through the beat.
The war had a deep effect on nearly every aspect of daily life. During daytime, life went on almost as if there was nothing going on. But as soon as dusk fell, the Londoners started to prepare for the nightly German bombings.
How I do as words picking words. There's so do as words picking words.
Once the Americans joined in the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor, London became a bustling place filled with American and other foreign servicemen. Many became engaged with pretty English girls. Wartime most certainly was not a period of milk and honey. Food was not available in abundance, but instead needed to be rationed. Long queues formed of people waiting in front of butcher shops and other shops with their ration books in their hands. Prime Minister Winston Churchill frequently addressed the population by means of radio broadcasts. He was a gifted speaker. One of his famous speeches is this one. Throughout the war, London newspapers continued to cover the war effort and progress. Despite attacks by flying V-1 buzz bombs, also called doodlebugs, bands continued to perform in parks like Hyde Park. During the entire war, the London Underground remained in operation. Most of its tunnels were far too deep to be damaged by the German bombings, although Bank Station, that lies close to the surface, was destroyed by a bomb that rolled down its stairs. Going down its escalators was always an experience filled with its particular sights, smells and noises. The London Underground served as a vast network of air raid shelters. Many Londoners would descend every night via the escalators to spend the night in relative safety from the bombings on platforms and even on the rails. Trains would often still run in the evening, and foot passengers would have to make their way over a narrow, about 2 feet wide strip of the platform between the train and the sleeping, sheltering people. In the evening, special food trains would halt at many stations to deliver hot drinks and bread buns. Women played an important role during wartime. Not only did they look after the children while the men were in active service in the Army, RAF, Royal Navy or Home Guard, but they also worked in munitions factories as ambulance drivers, railway signal boxes, female air raid wardens, and in particular on the farmlands. The latter worked for the Women's Land Army, WLA. These women were often referred to as land girls. Unused tube tunnels also served as underground munitions and other war gear factories. The Plessy Defence Electronics Company built a secret factory in a newly constructed underground tunnel at the eastern end of the Central Line. Many women were involved in these wartime production activities. Women pilots transported planes from the factories to the squadrons. After around 8 o'clock in the evening, the air raid sirens would wail their sinister sounds to warn for imminent attacks. Once the bombing started, many Londoners took their refuge in air raid shelters. Hordes of people scrambled to get to the nearest entrance of a shelter. These shelters were cramped and smelly. After the all clear sounded, people could leave the shelters and go back home. Gas masks were issued to the population at the beginning of the war in September 1939. The government was extremely scared that the Germans would use poisonous gas against the British population, including mustard gas. People were encouraged to wear the masks for at least 15 minutes a day in order to get used to them. The gas masks were carried in a cardboard box with a strap around the neck. The Air Ministry imposed a blackout for the entire country. The aim was to make it as difficult as possible for enemy aircraft to navigate and find bombing targets. The blackout required that all windows and doors had to be covered at night with suitable material. Londoners were also obliged to have buckets of water and buckets filled with sand ready to put out any incendiary bombs. The Blitz began at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on September the 7th, 1940, when German planes appeared over London. For 2 hours, 348 German bombers and 670 fighters targeted the city, dropping high explosive bombs as well as incendiary devices. The first day of the Blitz is remembered as Black Saturday. Subsequently, the Blitz period lasted for 8 months. After the terrible bombings of London's Docklands, Churchill and his wife Clementine visited the area and observed the destruction from a barge on the River Thames. King George and his wife Elizabeth frequently visited bombed-out areas of London to try to boost morale. Buckingham Palace did not escape from the war, as it was bombed twice. The damage was minor. Queen Elizabeth supposedly said that she was pleased that the palace was bombed, to undergo the same fate as the population. The aerial attacks and dogfights were controlled from underground bunkers. WAAF women were involved in moving objects with long sticks on a huge table with the map of England. These objects represented the squadrons. Other women were constantly on the telephone passing on information from the squadrons. The Lancaster bombers frequently took off from airfields like Biggin Hill to perform bombing raids on cities in Germany like Berlin and Dresden. After the Blitz, a period of less intensive bombing followed, which lasted for about 2 years. Later on during the war, Adolf Hitler decided to bomb London with the so-called Vergeltungswaffen V1 and V2. The V2 was a ballistic rocket which travelled at a speed of 5 times the speed of sound and took about 8 minutes from Germany to UK. The V2 thus would hit its target totally unannounced. During the war, in total about 30,000 Londoners were killed and many injured. Frequently, mass funeral services took place. Now you have watched this film, I'm sure you are filled with a mixture of amazement and some degree of disappointment. Not everything is perfect, and it can be concluded that AI video creation is just passing the first stage of infancy. Due to copyright and privacy restrictions, the AI is not permitted to regenerate real-life persons, like for example Winston Churchill and King George VI. However, the writing is on the wall, as they say. Within a couple of years, this technology will have approached maturity, such that a full-length cinema movie can be automatically AI generated in its entirety from one well-written script. It is understandable that human content creators, writers, actors and movie directors are worried about their future jobs. It is clear that the world is at the dawn of an entirely new era, with totally different professional playing fields. This train can and will not be stopped. The cat is out of the bag. Thanks for watching.